In an effort to bring the 1867 Plains War to a close, more than 5,000 Native people gathered near the Medicine Lodge Creek Peace Council grounds in Kansas on October 14, 1867. Yet only the band led by Black Kettle was present there. The rest of the Cheyenne had assembled along the Cimarron River in Indian Territory, where Stone Forehead, keeper of the sacred arrows, was to conduct the sacred renewal ceremony. Black Kettle had an informal meeting with the peace commissioners 3 days later. He did not hide his frustration. He reminded them that his people had once lived in friendship with the whites, but said that constant schemes and pressure had forced the Cheyenne aside. He urged the commissioners to deal honestly and directly, asking why they could not speak plainly and allow peace to stand without deception or coercion. Later that same day, Chiefs Tall Bull and Gray Head of the Sistas Dogmen visited the council grounds. Before departing, Tall Bull confronted Black Kettle inside his camp. He questioned why Black Kettle was not on the Cimarron River taking part in the sacred renewal. Tall Bull demanded that he travel south and explain to the called-out people what good could possibly come from signing yet another treaty with the Vihoe, the white men. When Black Kettle refused, Tall Bull threatened to destroy his horse herd and warned him to keep silent. When formal negotiations opened on October 19th, Black Kettle said nothing. 3 days later, in the midst of a heavy rain, the Dogmen returned. They roused Black Kettle from his rest and compelled him to ride with them to the commissioner's camp. As they waited for the white officials to prepare themselves, Black Kettle became visibly angry during a heated exchange with Little Robe. Though no interpreters were present to translate the argument, a reporter who witnessed the scene later observed that serving as a peace chief among the Cheyenne in 1867 was a perilous calling. Senator John B. Henderson arrived at the council grounds and insisted that the Cheyennes appear for negotiations. The atmosphere grew tense as tempers rose, but Black Kettle stepped between Henderson and the Dogmen, preventing the dispute from turning violent. Before leaving, however, the Dogmen compelled Black Kettle to ride south with them to the Cimarron. His sudden removal unsettled the peace commissioners and the newspapermen present, many of whom feared it signaled an impending Cheyenne assault. Meanwhile, the Kiowas and Comanches placed their marks on a treaty on October 21st. At last, on October 27th, Cheyenne warriors and dogmen burst from the timber and crossed the creek at full gallop, shouting and firing their guns. Black Kettle rode near the front, his appearance worn and unkempt but very much alive. Though the scene looked like the start of a battle, it was no attack. The Cheyennes had come prepared to hear what the Vihoe, the white officials, had to say. The Cheyenne and Arapaho Council opened the following day, yet once again Black Kettle was urged to hold his tongue. Only Dogman Chief Buffalo Chief addressed the gathering. He made it clear that his people did not claim the country south of the Arkansas River, but the land between the Arkansas and the Platte belonged to them. He accused the government of offering gifts while steadily taking away their territory, warning that such actions only led to war. The commissioners gave no response. Silence settled over the grounds. Seeing no further discussion forthcoming, the Cheyenne leaders began to withdraw. At that moment, interpreter John Smith persuaded them to remain and hear Senator Henderson. Henderson assured them they would be allowed to travel across the unsettled stretches of country between the Arkansas and Platte rivers, lands they had long considered their own, for the purpose of hunting buffalo. While Henderson's words were carefully chosen, the full treaty terms were never read aloud to the Cheyenne, and later the government failed to uphold the understanding he conveyed. The final document stated that the Cheyennes retained the right to hunt only on lands south of the Arkansas. The winter of 1867–68 proved bitter, but the months that followed were harsher still. In March, when Philip Sheridan, commander of the Division of the Missouri, halted the distribution of weapons during the annuity issue, Black Kettle and other chiefs openly voiced their anger. The same thing occurred in April, though by then the Sistas were in desperate straits and close to starvation, and Black Kettle held his peace. During the May distribution, Black Kettle and Stone Forehead confronted Agent Edward W. Wynkoop about the promised arms that had yet to arrive. Though dissatisfied, they accepted the food and goods. Matters came to a head on July 20th. When it became clear that weapons would once again be withheld, Black Kettle and the other chiefs halted the proceedings. In frustration, he declared that their white brothers were withdrawing the hand of friendship extended at Medicine Lodge Creek. He refused the shipment, but stated that he would wait patiently for the Great Father in Washington to deliver the arms and ammunition that had been pledged. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, Wynkoop appealed for the release of the weapons and secured approval on the condition that no harm would come from their delivery. On August 9th, Black Kettle and the other chiefs camped near Fort Larned and pledged that the arms would not be used against white settlers. The agent then distributed both the previously rejected supplies and the long-awaited guns. The chiefs received them with relief and satisfaction. That very same day, William T. Sherman established a new military district in Indian Territory for the Cheyennes, Arapahoes, Comanches, and Kiowas, placing it under the command of William Babcock Hazen, a move that signaled how uncertain the peace truly remained. On August 10th, word reached the agencies that a Cheyenne war party, which had first set out on August 2nd, intending to strike the Pawnees in Nebraska, had turned aside and unleashed havoc along the Saline and Solomon Rivers in Kansas. What began as a tribal raid became days of violence against white settlers, homes burned, families attacked, lives lost. When Black Kettle, still camped near Fort Larned, learned of the bloodshed, he tore at his hair and garments in anguish. Agent Edward W. Wynkoop, witnessing the chief's despair, urged him to move closer to the fort, assuring him he would see that he was protected. Black Kettle would not agree. He had not forgotten how, in November 1864, soldiers had promised safety to his people if they gathered at Sand Creek, only for that promise to end in slaughter. Though he had planned to follow the buffalo trails, Black Kettle instead chose to lead his band farther from white settlements. He headed south into Indian Territory, toward the valley of the Washita River, hoping distance might spare his people from further trouble. His fears proved well-founded. On September 17th, William T. Sherman declared open war against the Cheyennes. The time for negotiation, in the eyes of the military, had passed. No more councils, no more pledges. This campaign would break Cheyenne independence on the central and southern plains. As the months slipped by, Black Kettle heard troubling reports. Soldiers of the VOI were riding south of the Arkansas, hunting down Cheyenne bands. He also learned that a white officer at Fort Cobb, some 119 miles east of his village along the Washita, might be willing to listen. In the teeth of a bitter winter storm, Black Kettle and several companions saddled their ponies and rode through the cold to meet Colonel William Babcock Hazen, seeking once more a path to peace. On November 20th, Black Kettle spoke plainly to Colonel William Babcock Hazen. He told him he had done all a man could do to restrain his young warriors. Yet some would not heed him, and once the fighting broke out, he could no longer keep every one of them in camp. It was a statement he had delivered to white officials more than once before. Despite later rumors, he did not offer captives in exchange for peace, for he held none. Hazen listened with courtesy, but he would not permit Black Kettle to bring his band into the military district he described as a place of safety for Indians not engaged in the war. 2 days afterward, Hazen informed William T. Sherman that making peace with Black Kettle would likely have drawn many of the Cheyennes then raiding south of the Arkansas into his post. Yet Black Kettle himself was not leading raids. Still, in the eyes of the Army, nothing had changed. He was regarded as the principal chief of the Cheyennes, and by that standing he was held responsible as though he were their chief war leader. The night of November 26th settled in bitter and cold. Even so, Black Kettle gathered with the chiefs in his village along the Washita River. Around their council fires they no doubt weighed their course, speaking of soldiers, of peace, and of what the next day might bring. Their talk would count for nothing. At first light, soldiers of the Viho, I came thundering into the sleeping village, shouting as they rode and firing into the lodges. Women cried out. Children scattered in terror. The horror that had visited Sand Creek 4 years before had returned. Black Kettle sprang to a pony tied near his lodge and pulled his wife, medicine woman later, up behind him. Together, they urged the animal toward the icy waters of the Washita, hoping to gain the far bank and safety beyond. They had scarcely gone a minute or two before gunfire struck them down. Both fell, lifeless, into the winter morning. Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer and the 7th U.S. Cavalry had charged the village without knowing exactly who was encamped there. In his official report, Custer claimed that 101 Cheyenne warriors had been killed, along with Black Kettle, and that some women and children had also died. But the numbers have long been disputed. 2 men of mixed Arapaho heritage who served with the command, Jack Fitzpatrick and John Poisel, Jr., later stated that the count was greatly overstated. In their view, no more than 20 fighting men were killed, and roughly 40 of the dead were women and children. Former agent Edward W. Wynkoop received their testimony. In December 1868, speaking at Cooper Institute in New York City, he described Black Kettle as a man whose whole character was fixed upon one purpose: to act in the best interest of his people. However, the called-out people judged him, from the day he rose as a chief in 1855 until he fell beside the Washita. Black Kettle labored without rest to prevent bloodshed and to bring peace between his nation and the whites.